All right. We're starting a new parsha in Ayin Beis, Parshas Chukas, and it starts off with the usual pasuk, beginning of Parshas Chukas, which is the sound okay? By the way, yeah. See in the chat, sound okay? Well, I assume it is. Yeah. Okay, good. Okay, so Parshas Chukas starts off with the a lot of my mornings start off with this pasuk. Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe mel Aharon lemoir. I don't have to give a review of the previous proc because he's going to do it himself shortly, so it won't be necessary for me to do that. Al Kapanim, we started off with the pasuk where Vaydaber Hashem Moshe mel Aharon lemoir zois chukas haTorah asher tziva Hashem lemoir. This is the chukas haTorah. This is the chukah of Torah, the chukah shebechukim, right? The chukah of Torah. Okay, he asked a number of questions. Mahu inyan asher tziva Hashem. Why does the pasuk say Vaydaber Hashem zois chukas haTorah asher tziva Hashem leimoy? So the Chorah Havilela Meimar, it should have said Asher Anoichi Matzaveh. Why Asher Tziva Hashem? He's like speaking about himself in the third person, Kaviochel. It's HaKadosh Baruch Hu speaking to Moshe Rabbeinu, Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe. So we already know it's Hashem speaking to Moshe, and then he should have said Asher Anoichi Metzaveh, or Ani Metzaveh. Why does it speak about himself, so to speak, in the third person? Sharikwan Ne'emar, it already said at the beginning of the pasuk, Vaydaber Hashem. Mahu oid Asher Tziva Hashem. What is the additional inyan here, and why do we need it? All right, he'll explain at the end of the moment. It's different from all the other karbonos. That all the other karbonos have to be done inside the kloim of the Azara. This is true of the Beis HaMikdash. In the Mishkan, as long as you could see the Mishkan from a distance, you could see the Mishkan, you could do it anywhere as long as you could still see the Mishkan. But when it comes to the Beis HaMikdash, everything had to be done bifnim. Whereas Paraduma is dafka dan b'chutz. Paraduma maaseh dafka b'chutz. Rak shahazos adam tzarich los nechach pnei moed. Only what? The dam has to be splashed towards the oil moed. But the paraduma is done b'chutz, and we have to understand why that is, and why is that different from every other mitzvah, every other korban in the Torah. Why did it all have to be done by Elazar and not by, let's say, Aharon HaKohen? Hashem tells Moshe and Aaron, why is the paraduma dafka done by the Sagan? The how would you call the Sagan Kohen? The vice Kohen, I don't know, whatever you would call him. Vice doesn't sound like the right word, but in any event, that's what he was. He was the second in charge, the second in command.
Deputy.
The what?
Deputy.
Deputy, yeah. The deputy Kohen, good. Okay. Well, Hami calls there in order to be able to understand this. So, we have to go into something that's completely what on earth does it have to do with the Eser Sefiros like haGenuzos and the Eser Sefiros like gluyim, but we'll see soon. At least by the time we get to the end of the mind, we'll understand what this inyan is. Well, Hami calls there in order to understand that, we have to first preface an explanation. What we explained above. The Eser Sefiros like gluyim, that the 10 Sefiros, the gluyim, the Sefiros HaGluyim, in other words, the Sefiros of Atzilus, essentially, Nimshachim Eser Sefiros haGenuzos b'ma'atzilan, is drawn from the Eser Sefiros haGenuzos. What are the Eser Sefiros haGenuzos? Those are the Eser Sefiros in the Ora and Sof before the Tzimtzum, and as Dafka, these Sefiros and the Inyan of the Tziur HaOiros before the Tzimtzum, not the Inyan of Kailim. The Inyan of Kailim is the Rishimo, and the Inyan of Eser Sefiros haGenuzos is the Tziur HaOr before the Tzimtzum. The Hainu Shorsha HaOiros, as we said before, the Shorish of the Oiros are Klulim Bor in Sof Shlifnei HaTzimtzum. which is in the Or Ein Sof B'Bnei HaTzimtzum, Lifnei HaTzimtzum, and in the Madrega of Or Ein Sof, which is called Or HaShayach L'Olemus, as we've said many, many times. And Hamshochasam, who Alidei HaTzimtzum, these oiros of the Eser Sefiros haGenuzos are nimshach into the Eser Sefiros haGenuzos via the Tzimtzum. How does the Tzimtzum do that? When it's Boyer, we explained in Tzimtzum Hazeh, who the Or Ein Sof Lifnei HaTzimtzum, when it comes to the Or Ein Sof prior to the Tzimtzum, Harekol Eser Sefiros and Mechanisis Achdus Vis Arvus. All the Sefiros are in a state of unity and a state of intermingling. They're intermingled one with the other. That you can't separate one from the other. You can't tell one from the other. They're all davar echad. And how much more so from the oiros after the Tzimtzum, even the oiros of Akudim. But nevertheless, it's Esa oiros. That's after the Tzimtzum. But before the Tzimtzum, they'll all be Zachtus with Arvus. At that point in time, they were Madrega Gavoya v'na'al b'yoser be'etzem, on an extremely high Madrega in and of themselves, not comparatively speaking, but in absolute terms, they were on an extremely high level. They weren't even recognizable to themselves, so to speak. Although the Atzman can also mean obviously independently, individually. They weren't known and understood and realized individually, but I think there's an additional meaning of here. Atzman, even they themselves didn't know of their separation from each other, of their differentiation from one to the other, right? In any event, whichever way you want to look at it, they were not. It was not nikar that they were metzias bifnei Atzma. V'gam his achtus. They were also in a state of his achdus, and hayamei bahem or naile. There was an oir that was not just the or of each sphere, but an or naile, a very lofty oir. He's going to explain this a little bit more soon. Shalomalma oiros atzman, that transcended the oiros themselves. In other words, there was an oir makif which contained all of them. This is the or shebegilu or hashayach la'olamis, and the or hashayach la'olamis is, so to speak, enveloped in the or shebegilu la'atzmoi. In any event, this or that unifies all the spheroids as one. It's l'mayla mi ha'or ha'spheroids atzman. And what does the tzimtzum do? The tzimtzum removes that or that is higher than the spheroids, haGenuzos, and binds them together as one thing, so that they can't even be differentiated one from the other, and perhaps not even to themselves. So the Tzimtzum removes that oir, it takes that or away from them, so that this or can now become manifested as separate oiros, individual oiros that can be distinguished one from the other. And the Tzimtzum is such, Shenimshach Sphira Pratios, Spherois Pratios or Sphira Pratis, it should be, that the sphere, each sphere is Nimshach and Oifen Prati, each sphere is now individualized. Most spheres are Chochma Bifnei Atzmo, Chochma on its own, and Bina on its own, and Chesed, and so on and so forth. They say, Yadim Madregasa, that this caused it to descend from the level that it was Ami Madregas, Shana says, the Bchinis Betzius Nikeres. And it now became a recognizable Metzius. In other words, recognizable as an independent sphere, not recognizable as one sort of achdus of all the spheres together. But now we can distinguish between Chochma, this is Chochma, that's Bina, that's Chesed, and so on and so forth. And this is an union of a reduction in the oir. In other words, when the oir was miskaber, the oir that unified them all, when that or was misgaber, and then you couldn't distinguish one from the other. When that or is removed to the tzimtzum, then they come out as individual spheroids, and therefore there's a reduction in the or. There's a reduction in the or. The or that was mitzaref for them is removed. V'gam shnismaita or hanaile sheyeh b'chnisis achtus kulam, and that or that caused them to all be one unit has been removed. That was the inyan of the tzimtzum. Now, he gave two masholim for this, and he's going to review these masholim. Briefly, the first mashal was a letter from a word, like taking a letter, one letter from a word. He's going to use the example of the letter bet from the word Baruch, letter base from Baruch. And he's bar hamoshel, and the moshel was given mitayvus Baruch from the word Baruch. Sheyesh bo haskala, sheyesh bo haskala. There is an idea, there's a concept in that, Baruch blessed and so on. There's an idea there. But when the letters are all separated, one from the other, the bet is separated from the resh, from the vav, from the chaf, then each letter, even though it was originally part of this thing, is much, much reduced from the way it was before. Now it's only a base. Yes, it has the possibility of being joined again to the resh, vav, chaf, but until it's joined again to the resh, vav, chaf, it's only a single letter that doesn't have too much meaning on its own, even though every ois has its own meaning, but it certainly doesn't have the meaning of a whole word. Okay, so yesh bo haskola, kshmafridim ois achas, heyo shezeu ois ha-ois mamish, even though even though it is the same letter, the very same letter itself, nothing actually changed in the letter. The letter itself is still the same letter. The ois base is still ois base. It doesn't have the same, it doesn't contain the same concept as the word contained, the word Baruch. The letter itself does not contain the same word, the same or, the same haskola. When it's by oid moshel, that was the first moshel. Then there's the second moshel. The second moshel is when one prat of a whole concept is taught by the Rav to his Talmud. That prat, separated from all the other pratim, which eventually will make up the entire concept, is only being explained one chapter of the entire book, so to speak. Obviously, in isolation, it's only a very small oyer, which is not in the entire, doesn't give you the entire picture, doesn't give you a clear picture of the entire thing. And even when you have a clear picture, he's going to say, it's still not the same as the seichel was by the Rav. Okay, when he's bar oed moshel, a second moshel, kmo in sichli, an intellectual concept, sheba beribu pratim, that comes with a lot of different details in it. Pratu sechel prati. Each prat is a sechel prati, is an inyan, is an individual inyan. Each inyan can be understood individually and can be researched individually, and eventually it will be joined up to other concepts. As he says, umikol pratim yachad, with all of the details of this idea together, then we can understand the entire thing, the entire idea as one complete but complex idea. So when the idea is divided into, let's say, chapters and subchapters, when you're learning a subchapter, you might understand the inyan for itself, but you don't understand it in the larger context of what the whole book is about, the whole sefer is about. And if the sefer is about a certain concept, let's say, I don't know, whatever it's talking about, let's say, how, I don't know, brain waves or whatever, something like that. So they might explain one little prat to you in the book, and that prat you might understand on its own, but you don't get the whole picture, obviously. Ubahashpor, when the Rav is trying to teach it to his student, he teaches it bit by bit, chapter by chapter, chapter heading by chapter heading. Not only is the prat or the inyan that comes out the way it's grasped by the Talmud, not nearly as complex as the way, or not nearly as complete as the way it is understood by the Rav. Whatever it has of the inyan sichli, which is understood from all the inyanim, once the student has all the inyanim of this particular concept, it's only a reduction, it's a reduction from the way it was by the Rav. B'chol inyan prati, afshenimtza boy gamken, even though he understands this prat on its own, he understands that prat on its own. Each prat is reduced from the way it was in Sechel Harav. Even after he understands all of the pratim, his grasp of it is not the way the Mashpia grasped it. The Mashpia is on a high madrega. He's still a Talmud until he becomes an independent Mashpia, perhaps. But he's a Talmud, and he understands it the way a Talmud would understand it, much less than than in the Seichel of the Rav. So each prat is reduced because it's not connected to the other pratim, and even when he has all the pratim together, it's still, nevertheless, not the Seichel of the Mashpia, not the Seichel of the Rav. Okay, so that's all that we explained up until now about the Indian of the Tzimtzum and what it did in terms of the Eser Sefiros haGenuzos. It separated them out as if they were an independent ois, which comes from a whole word, or as if it was a concept that comes from a whole range of related concepts that explains a larger issue, a larger Indian. Okay, so where are we going with this? So let's see, we're now in Perek Chovav. In other words, Shara Yichud Emuna, Perek Yud Beis, that's right at the end, the last Perek in Shara Yichud Emuna. Kasav Azel Lashoina, this is what the Alter Rebbe writes. Ki kol ois hu hamshoches chayus v'koyach miyuchad proti. Every letter is a specific koyach and a specific, let's call it a piece of energy. Chayus v'koyach miyuchad proti. It's an individual and unique koyach and chayus. Ukshenitztarfu oisius harbe, and when many letters are joined together, liyos teva, to make a word. Azam ilvad ribo men koyches v'chayus. Not only is it a composition of all of the individual parts of it, let's say the base, the resh, the vav, and the chaf of the word. Not only is it a compilation and amalgamation of those 4 or 5 letters, whatever it is, Ozo is much more than that. Ha'ol al kulana, and transcending them all. In other words, the whole is much greater than the sum of its parts. That's the way to put it. And I think that's the way it's put in English. The whole is much greater than the sum of its various constituent parts. So Ozo is ha'ol al kulana, hamshochas koyach elyon v'chayis klolis hakoleles u'shekula keneged kol minei koyches v'chayis pratias. So once they're joined together, there's an or kloli that comes down and transcends all of the whole is much greater than some of the parts. No bekitzer. Kol minei koyches pratias shelo oisias v'ol al gabein, transcends all of them. V'hi mecharbatan u'tzarfatan yachad chulo, and that or is actually what binds those things together. So for now, what would happen, for example, if you had a word that doesn't have a meaning. There's no meaning of the word in Hebrew. I'll give you an example. Often the example used in Hasidus is the word Tzohar. Yeah, Tzohar ta'aseh l'teva. The word Tzohar meaning it can mean a light, it can mean a window, Rashi says. Yeah, but al kopanim, it has to do with light. Tzohar ta'aseh l'teva. And so this is a teaching from the Baal Shem Tov. There's also the same letters, but in a different siruf, called Es Tzara Hila Yaakov. Tzara, the word Tzara is the same letter, Tzadik Resh Hey, as Tzohar Tzadik Hey Resh. Right, same word, same letters, but in a different siruf, therefore a different meaning. Now, it's brought to Chassidus that in order to get from one to the other, in order to get from a state, a tzara hila Yaakov, in order to get from that state to the idea of it can be lichtik, there can be light coming into the situation, or the situation itself can in fact be a source of light. The other Pirush in Zohar, it's not just a window, it's a source of light. In order to get to do that, so you have to go through various in-between stages, which are the other tzirufim of the word haratz and rotzeh. Someone who does with alacrity what a Kosh Baruch Hu rotzeh, then he's able to change tzara into tzohar. But there's another permutation of that word, which is Let me just see which one is it now. Let me just make a whiteboard here. So there's Tohar, right? There's Tohar. There's Torah. There's Haratz. Oops. You know what I mean. Okay, it's supposed to be a tzadik over here. I'm writing with a mouse. Haratz and Ratza, Roitze. Masha Kodesh Baruch Hu Roitze. Yeah. Okay, so there's one, actually two. There are two letters, two permutations that are meaningless. Rahatz is one of them. Yeah. The word rahatz. There you go. The word rahatz is a meaningless permutation. Why is that a meaningless permutation? Because it doesn't have an or kloli that's machabe these oises into a meaningful word. There's no or kloli for that particular combination of letters of rahatz. Yes. Okay. Good. So that's what we just said. If there's an or kloli that's machaber the word, then the word has a meaning. So that's again what he said over here. Besides the particular koiches, in other words, the particular letters being joined together, there's an or kloli ha'olal kulon. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. When we said that every letter is a particular chayes, a chayes meyuchad. Now the Rebbe Rasha wants to bevorn, he wants to prevent us from making an error over here, and he does it in a very sort of very elegant way. What's the mistake? The mistake might be that you might think that we're talking here about kalim. We're not talking about the kalim. We're talking about the oil. We're talking about the inyan of the oil race. And the Indian of the oil, as we said over here, the intention is not the chayus of that ois, the letter hey, let's say, the chayus of the letter hey. That's not what we're talking about. The chayus of the letter hey that makes it the letter hey. We're talking about the oil that's contained in the word, right? The or that's contained in every letter, not just the or that gives chayus to the kli of the letter, but the meaning of the. Let me just switch that off. Again, rank al chayus the ois atzmoy the lamailo hu hachayus da kelim atzman. Right? It's not the chayus of them. That's not what we talk about. The chayus of the kelim atzman levada or mislavish b'soichan, excluding the or which is in them. We're not talking about that. Ki'im shebichlal zehu gama or hamislabish ba'oisis. We're talking about the or hamalubish ba'oisis, not the or of the kli of the ois, the conceptual or, the or which which is not darshan by the letter, but which is darshan by the word that that has these letters. He's going to explain a little bit better. V'chein mashma b'hagoah sham. That's understood also in the hagoah in Shari Yichu Emuna, which I have up on the next screen. Just tell me if you can see it. Is that visible? I don't have my chat. Let's see what's going on here. Yeah, can you see it, everybody? If you just don't mind writing in the chat, you should be able to see it. Yeah. Can you see here? That's the Hagoah. No. Oh. All right. 1 second. Let me just share screen. Oh, there we go. Now you'll probably be able to see it, right? Yeah. Yes. Okay. Good. Okay. So I said this is what he says in Nagoya in Tanya. This is Nagoya in Perikut base of Shari Emuna. Since each of the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, Each is an individual chayas, an individual koyach. In other words, each letter is unique in that it shows a type of unique koyach. It has a unique inyan to it. It has a unique power to it. Let's call it a unique DNA for each letter, right? Each letter has its own DNA, so to speak. Koyach miyuchad proti, she'eno nimshach ba'ois acheres, which is not drawn into any other letter. L'chach hem tmunason b'ksav. Gam tmunason b'ksav. And therefore, each letter, the way you write it in ksav is going to be different from every other letter. Yeah. Kol ois he betmuna miyuchedet. It has its own particular shape. It has its own particular shape and form. Pratis. Individually. Hamoira al tziur hamshocha is galus haor, that shows of the type of oil that that letter contains. Is galus haor v'achayis v'koyach hanigla v'nimshach b'oid zeh, b'oid zo, that is drawn into this particular ois and not into any other ois. As this letter is illuminated by the Ratzon and the Chokhmah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because the letters really start in the Chokhmah and even higher than Chokhmah in Ratzon. And therefore, each letter has its own particular Ratzon. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants this letter to be a letter base, which represents this Inyan, and letter Aleph represents that Inyan, and so on and so forth. So each letter has its own particular Inyan. You share this one. Okay, here we go. Okay, so that's what the Haggadah said, that each letter has its own chayus. And that's what we're not talking about, the chayus of the letter, but the or that's nimshach al yedei, that letter, as he's going to explain. Mashakasu the oil al kulono, the or that's oile that transcends them all, the whole that is greater than the sum of its parts. Hu hamshochas koyach elyon v'chayus kloli. This is a drawing down of a koyach elyon, a chayus kloli, and it's not individuated to this particular letter or that particular letter. It's a koyach elyon v'chayus kloli. Hamachaber mitzarev kol ha'oisias. It's joins together all the oises of this particular word. So the word that we had before, tzohar, window or the source of light, there's an or that's matzar of those three letters of the word tzohar, tzadik heiresh, and gives it a meaning beyond the inyan of the letters themselves. Therefore, nire, it's quite apparent. This is not the or that's in the letter itself that constitutes the chayus of that particular letter. If you regard the letter as a guf, so a guf has an neshama, we're not talking about the neshama of that ois itself, right? Ki im l'malim mimenu. We're talking about a or that transcends that and is mechaber all of the neshamois of that particular word, if you could use such an expression, together. It's lamaila mi the ois and each of the individual ois. Again, the expression in the English expression is perfect for that. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts, which I think they actually took from Chassidus somewhere along the line. Okay. So he says here in Haggadah, in this Haggadah over here, he says an interesting thing that it could be that the or ha'oila al kulana, the or that transcends the entire word, contains aspects of each of the letter in itself, as each of the letters of that word in itself as well. In other words, even the chayus of the letters is contained in that transcendent or. It could be. He says it might be that that's the case. And why would that be? Because there are some concepts that you can explain only using only one particular word. Generally, when you want to say, he's going to mention this shortly, when you want to say the concept of, the example he will use shortly is Adon Olam, right? The master of the worlds. So you can say it in various different ways. You could say Melech Olam, you could say Ribon Olam, you could say Sholet HaKol Olam. You could there's a number of different ways of saying the same, giving over the same idea with different oisias. But there's some inyonim that you can only say it one way. There's no other way to say it, right? So therefore, it might be that the or hamislabish, the or that's in the oasis themselves, is actually also part of the or that transcends them and binds them together. In other words, the conceptual or the concept that chooses these letters. In some cases, they are mutually need each other, so to speak. That they can only be expressed in that particular way through those particular oasis. Okay. But nevertheless, it's clear. We're certainly not talking about that, the or of the letter itself. Or but rather we're talking about an or which transcends them and is in fact movdal from them. Movdal meaning separated. Movdal is an expression which is used quite often in the Maharal. The Maharal of Prague talks about a madrega which he calls the madregas hamuvdal. Usually, when he talks about the Muvdal, he's talking about Olam HaAtzilus, right? The world of Atzilus is called Muvdal because it's separated from the other Olamis. All the other Olamis are Yesh Ayin. Even the world of the world of Bria is in of Yesh Ayin. Masha'ekan Atzilus is not Yesh Ayin, it's Ne'etzal, it's an Olam Ne'etzal, but not an Olam Nivra. It's not a created world in that sense. In any event, that is the idea of Nivdal. So he talks about it as an or Elyon Muvdal, or a high madrega of or. Because when an idea is clothed in letters, it doesn't have to be dafka in these letters. Sometimes it does, right? But most of the time it doesn't have to be. It could be in other letters. As I explained before, like in the words of the Adon Olam, Shu Inyan Shlita V'Hamshola, it's the rulership of the world. Hari Inyan Hazeh, this particular Inyan, Yachol Avo Gam B'Oises Acherim, can be expressed in other ways as well. Melech HaOlam, Ribon HaOlam, and so on and so forth. V'im Kain, Lo Mitzad HaSeichel Atzmoi, Hutzrach, Liyos Mulubash B'Oises Elu Dafka. The Seichel doesn't require dafka those letters to express itself. It can express itself in different letters. Instead of the word adoin, it can use the word melech or riboin or one of the other words, right? One of the other words to express the concept. So it doesn't have to be melubash dafka in those letters. As we see, that very often you'll find in for instance in Shulchan Aruch and the Shulchan Aruch HaTur, or when you're learning Rishonim Bichlal, you'll find that the same concept is expressed by a number of different Rishonim, but in different words, right? Toyos, Varosh, Varan, Rabbeinu Asher, Rabbeinu Nisim, all of them express the same idea, but in different oasis. They present the same logical concept, the same concept. He says that they say that same concept in different letters, in different words. It's not necessary that this particular seichel would have to be said in those letters. Now, I said before that there are some cases where it would have to be said in those letters. It couldn't be said in any other letters, and those are actually the letters of Torah Shebichsav. In Torah Shebichsav, it could only be said that way. It couldn't be said another way, right? It's only in Torah Shebal Peh that it could be said another way, because Torah Shebal Peh is much less defined than Torah Shebichsav. Torah Shebichsav has to be dafka these oisias and no other oisias. And that's why all the Sifrei Torah that we have are all identical one to the other. It's not just svaras. Dafka has to be in these oisias. Anyway, that's a side issue, but it's an interesting thing. We're not expressing a seichel in the oisias here. That applies more to Torah Shebal Peh. We're expressing elokus in the oisias, and therefore they have to be exactly that way in Torah Shebal. Okay. So let's continue. Rak mitzad koyach mitzarif. It's only that when we're talking about again Torah Shebal Peh, then the koyach mitzarif, that koyach that joins all the letters together, Metzarev u'mechaber ha'oises u'malbish bahem es ha'seichel, joins the letters together in order for the person to be able to express the idea that he wants to give over in a particular manner, in a particular seichel that he wants to give over. And he chooses his words according to who he is, according to his how his seichel operates, and so on and so forth. Shezeu, so what is it that joins them together? Shezeu koich elyon. What joins the letters together to form the words that express the idea? Shezeu koich elyon meguf ha-seichel melubash ba'oisis chulu. That comes actually from seichel that's melubash in the oasis. The oasis is only the outward expression thereof through the mouth, but the seichel itself is expressed in these oasis. Ulachein, and therefore hatinoik, a baby, hagam sheyesh lo ma'at hasoga, even though he might have some kind of grasp, kfi erkoi, according to his level. He won't be able to put into words what he's thinking. In other words, it'll take him a long while before he can say Abba or whatever. I mean, it takes many months before the child can put it together. Even if he recognizes his father, recognizes his mother, it's going to take a while. Ima comes somehow easier, but the child, because he doesn't yet have the seichel to mechaber oisius, therefore he's not able to speak right away. Of course, the exception to this was Adam HaRishon, but there he was created as a perfect, as a complete human being. He doesn't have to grow up. He doesn't start off as a baby. He start off as a finished product. Okay. In any event, so even though this little kid might have some kind of seichel, but he doesn't have the words to put the seichel into. Because he doesn't have this koyach elyon yet that joins the letters together or joins the syllables together in order to express an idea, and that only comes with time. Now you would wonder what happens in very, very primitive societies where language is seemingly not nearly as developed as it is in more sophisticated societies. And the reason is that they don't, the intellectual aspect of it is not there either. And that's why, in other words, they don't have the concepts in the mind that they would express in words. It just doesn't. Now, I don't know if there are too many of these primitive societies left, maybe in the Amazon or whatever it is, but certainly the pygmies in South Africa. I remember when I lived there, the pygmies were deficient in many, like in language and things like that. They didn't have a comprehensive language. There's a lot of sign language in the pygmy language. Anyway, the koach hametzaref, that the power to join things together, to join the letters together, who koach hachochma, it comes from chochma. In other words, a very high koach, it's the highest manifested koach in the nefesh. And he goes on to say, and it's the truth is, it actually comes from ratzon. It doesn't just come from chochma. It's manifested first in chochma, the koach hametzaref, but it really comes from ratzon. It's the ratzon that wants to express certain things, and therefore it goes through the process of chokhmah and etc. until it gets through to malchus. Yeah. And the or mislabish bina, and the or that's mislabish in the oasis is actually from bina. It's not the or of bina, but it's the or that comes from bina. In other words, it's produced by bina. Because otherwise, what the person is saying is not understood. It's not understood either not by him or not by anybody. And that only happens when a person grows up and he's had some experience and so on. Ukmo limkor benichsa aviv. Ad sheyeh ben esim, sheyeh ben esim. So the Gemara tells us that a son should not be handling his father's businesses until he reaches the age of 20, because you have to have a certain amount of seichel, a certain ability to put two and two together. So a child should not be responsible for his father's property until he's over the age of 20. Okay, sha'al shleimus bechinas hamoichin da'aba, because only when he gets to the age of 20 does he get the moichin da'aba. In other words, when he passes out of the teenage years, strangely enough. I mean, Chazal also recognize that teenagers, in fact, there's a very interesting um, term for for teenagers in Hebrew, in modern Hebrew slang, really. They call it b'nei tipesh Yisrei. You have Sheish Yisrei, Chamesh Yisrei, and so on. Ben Chamesh Yisrei is a 15-year-old, Ben Sheish Yisrei, 16-year-old. But all of them fall under the main name of b'nei tipesh Yisrei. Tipesh is a fool, right? The years of foolishness. The teenage years of foolishness. Very, very worthwhile expression to remember. Okay. Once you guys will look at the Torah, Parashat Bamidbar, etc. Ben Esim Shona, like why Dafka Esim Shona? Because that's the time that the person gets the Moichin of Chochma and the Moichin of Bina. Alefcha Chochma, Alefcha Bina, then he has the Moichin, and that's the Indian of Esim Shona. Yeah, 10 years of for Bina, 10 years for Chochma. And he's going to explain this again later on. Perek Kuf Mem Vav. We're on Perek Kuf Kaf Vav over here, I think it is. Kaf, yeah, Chaf Vav. And he's talking about Perek Kuf Mem Vav, so it's way, way, way on in the Sefer. In any event, it says over there Kuf Mem Vav, but if you start with the Oisias, well, they Moichin the Yanika. The initial joining of the letters together is the Moichin the Yanika, it's immature intellect. Moichin the Yanika, there's various stages of the growth of a person. It's called Ibur, Yanika, and Moichin. Ibur is when the child is in the womb. Yanika is when he's a suckling, right? He's feeding from his mother. And then when he becomes a gadol, then it's called moichin. He gets intellect, but that's only at the age of 20. But it says over there in Kuf Mem Vav, he's going to explain that the combination of the oasis together is all the moichin di yanika, is the in other words, the ability to speak is moichin di yanika. It's not moichin di chokma, which is the ability to conceptualize. But nevertheless, he explains, even though we say that there, Achmis Barasham, it's clear from what we explain over there, when we're talking about an or pnimi, in other words, or that seichel that can be understood. Yachol hagbil seichel b'tzifra he when a person has this Indian of seichel, when he has an Indian of seichel, even if it's only seichel the yanika, then he has the ability to put together letters of words and speak and convey an idea through his speech. But that's not true when it's in a state of makif. If the seichel is bechinas pnimi, then he can talk, he can say it, he can express it. But if it's in a state of makif, then that can't be expressed. Makif is by definition inexpressible. It transcends the intellect. It's not grasped. It's something that's beyond you. And therefore, how can you possibly expect it? Express it? The only way that can be sort of expressed, not fully expressed, is by negation. Lo zeh v'lo zeh v'lo zeh. It's not this, it's not that, it's not the other thing. Right? Only in that way can it be sort of expressed, even though that's not the full expression thereof. Describing something by using positive terms is makes it much clearer than describing things by using negative terms. Obviously, it's not this, it's not that. Well, what is it? But it's not this, it's not that. It's much more roundabout and much more difficult to understand. But it is some kind of grasp, and that's what the Or Makif. We can explain the Or Makif by telling us, but by explaining what it's not. Okay. ונקרא זה חוכמה שבדיבור, זה called חוכמה שבדיבור, היינו שלימוס השכל, המביא לידי דיבור. It's the seichel that leads to speech. And it can be, if the truth be told, it can be moichin the yanika also, suckling intellect. In other words, the intellect has not fully developed, because fully developed intellect is the ability to really fully conceptualize things. Here, it's only the ability to speak, and even young kids have the ability to speak. Therefore, it's called the moichin diyanika that joins them letters together in this Hagoah that we're learning, that we're shortly going to finish. The Inyan Tziruf Hamavuar Khan, but the concept of Tziruf that is explained over here, in other words, combining the letters together, Humasha Megalu Maybe Esa Inyan Boesis with Tzirufim Elu Dafka, Tzirufim Acherim. So the concept we're explaining here is that a person reveals his seichel, his intellect, what he wants to say, in these particular words and not in others. That comes from Moichin the Abba, Shalom Hasoga, that transcends the Moichin of Bina. Bina is Hasoga. It transcends intellectual grasp. In other words, a person generally, there are certain conditions where a person has to think about every word that he says, how he's going to say it. But by most of us, it comes sort of automatically. We don't have to think too much. Hopefully, we think at least a little bit before we speak, and hopefully, we have thought before we open our mouths. But we don't have to think about how to put the words together. I've got to now put an aleph and a gimel and a hey and so on and so forth in order to make a word that I want to express. It comes about automatically because it comes from Moichin da Abba, right? Moichin da Abba is lamalim min asoga. It's not something that goes through an intellectual process when we speak. And it comes also from Yechidish Benefesh, and it's also from Yechida. In other words, it's from the highest madrega of Nefesh, which is Yechida, and which actually corresponds to Ratzoin and not to Chochma. It's the Pnimis of Chochma. It's Ratzoin. In any event, before the bracket, we were talking about that a person is only allowed to deal with his father's nechosim. He's allowed to buy and sell his father's property from the age of 20 and on. And then he continues, even an adult, like for example, when the Rav is teaching his student, he's teaching a student and a mature, a well-developed student. For sure, even if a well-developed student, the Rav cannot give over exactly the way it is in his own machshava. Why not? Because the person is still a kli, still being makabel. He hasn't learned to think fully by himself, and therefore, it has to be given over in bits and pieces, and it has to be given over like carefully and with explanation and so on and so forth. Otherwise, the student won't understand. Okay, so. He explains why. The student is still, even though he might be a mature student, nevertheless, his seichel is not on the level to be able to grasp the seichel of his Rav. So, Rav can explain Sugya and Gemara to his Talmud, but there's no doubt about it that the Talmud, even if he grasps the Sugya, is not going to grasp it nearly as clearly and as broadly as the Rav. Moshe Etzel the Rav, like it would be by the Rav. He's not going to get it the same. And therefore, for the Rav to explain it to the Talmud, he has to clothe it in certain letters that the Talmud will be able to understand. In other words, he has to use words that the student will understand. He can't use he can't express it the way he understands it for himself. He has to be able to express it for the Talmud the way the Talmud can grasp it. And as we see in a practical sense, we see with our own eyes, that whenever someone gives over seichel to somebody else, he has to change it from the way he thinks about it to the way that can be accepted by a third party. And truth be told, to be able to put it in words so that somebody else can it can be expressed to somebody else, is actually a deeper hasoga than thinking it for himself. Why? Because it's coming from koach haratzon to be able to express it in words. This is why it's not always possible, even if a person grasps a concept on his own, it's not always possible for him that he can give it over to somebody else. He can't always give it over to somebody else. He might not have it the oisius to be able to give it over to somebody else. The gam shemamtzi es ha'inyan sichlo masigol atzmo, that even though he's grasped it for himself, he can. It sometimes happens that he can't give it over to somebody else. He might understand it well, but he can't give it over. Why? He doesn't have the letters to be able to give it over. He doesn't have the oisius. Behind Liois, and the reason for it is as follows: Ki hatzirufa oisius by minakoyacha hiyuli de seichel. It comes from the undefined aspect of seichel, koyacha yuli, the transcendent aspect of seichel, koyacha yuli. The word yuli is actually, they say, is a Greek word in the various dictionaries. They say it's a Greek word, but it does have antecedents also in Torah literature. In Iyov, for example, it talks about behiloi neiro alaration. Behiloi means it lights up above. His candle lights up above my head. In other words, the neshama, right, lights up above my head, and that's called a koyach yuli. It's a koyach, a transcendent koyach. It's a koyach of oir. It's the oir of seichel. Koyach yuli de seichel. Shu pnimius l'malam yam sos v'asog seichel. It's on a higher madriga than the seichel itself. The b'shorsha hu me'atzmus hanefesh. This koyach mechaber and this koyach of expression is me'atzmus hanefesh. And that's what it says, that atzmus hanefesh malaya oisius, that the essence of the soul is filled with letters. In other words, it's filled with the ability to produce speech that other people can understand. Just as the letters themselves are not from the idea that's understood, but rather they're from the makor seichel. Similarly, the way the oases are put together, and gamkim makor seichel v'shorshan. Sorry, makor seichel. They are from the makor seichel v'shorshan v'kisichila. The ultimate cherish of the power that joins the letters together is really Yechidish Benefesh. In other words, it's what makes us human, the ability to be human. It says, Vayihi ha'adam lenefesh chaya. Yeah, in the beginning of Bereshis, Vayipach ba'apav nishbas chayim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu breathes into Adam's nostrils the breath of life. Vayihi lenefesh chaya. Right, and it became a living soul. So how does the Targum translate this? It says nefesh chaya leruach mamalala. That's what it says. Leruach mamalala, a speaking creature. So in other words, a living creature is a speaking creature when you're talking about human beings. The ability to communicate, which is why I think to a large extent why society seems to be falling apart at the moment is because people are not communicating with other people. They're not communicating in the proper way that human beings are meant to communicate. They're only communicating through electronics, and therefore you see all the things that are going on now. Why? Because a human being is a speaking creature. L'ruach mamalala means he's a speaking creature. He's created as Eliezer, that's true. There are kids that can talk sentences and at the age of 2. Yeah, they are. Yeah, some kids take a little bit longer. Usually, the age of 2 is when they start speaking. 18 months to 2 is when they just start speaking. But obviously, a child of 3 or 4 can put together longer sentences and so on and so forth. And although it's possible, I think the Alter Rebbe at the age of 2 was fully. Well, I could speak fluently, like he was fully conversant at the age of 2, as if he was an adult. I mean, we're talking about a special shoma, but nevertheless. Okay. So, the shorish of the ability to express oneself in words is a koyach of yichidish benefesh. Shemisham shorish oises. That's where the oises come from. Misham koyach atziruf letzarv lechaber oises, and that's where the ability to put the oasis together come from? Therefore, the combination of the letters into one word in a levado or a seichel melubash b'hateva, besides the seichel that the word gives over the particular concept that that word means, the meaning of that word. Yesh bezeh od oir elyon shelamal habe ma'aseichel hamusag. There's another oir which transcends the light that, the concept that the word contains. So, whatever the word is, let's say the word shor, for example, right? An ox. So the word shor contains the concept of an ox. But what is mechaber those letters together to express it as shor, to express it as ox? That is a koach that's higher than the letters of the word ox itself, even higher than the inyan that the letters shin vav resh express. Transcends it. And it could be that this koach ne'elam, this koach elyon that joins the letters together, is a koach ne'elam, something that we're unconscious of, something that we don't know about. In other words, when we say it's a koach ne'elam, what do we mean? V'hu atzmi. It's an inyan atzmi. It's an atzmi shel or pnimi. It's the essence of the or pnimi that makes it an or pnimi and not an or makif. Right? That makes it an or pnimi and not an or makif. It's the essence of the or pnimi as it is in his makor. That this is dafka meaning an or pnimi. In other words, an or that'll be malubish and a kli, and it's not an or makif that can't be malubish and a kli. That's where the koach hane'elam is. V'chayus kloli hu or hamizgale. And the chayus kloli is an or is mizgale who is or makif. The chayus kloli is not mizgale in oisius. It's not mizgale in pnimius. It's mizgale as bechinas makif. And even though there is an inyan of makif in the there's an inyan of makif that combines various inyonim together and so on, but it doesn't come into consciousness in most cases. That's why it's called an or makif. Or makif is an or that doesn't come into consciousness. With yesh loiman, we could say that that's perhaps the madrega of yechida of the nefesh, and then what combines the letters together is chaya. So what combines yechida, or ha'oila al kulan is bechinas yechida, and the or that combines the letters together, that would come from chaya. That would be keser and chokhmah. Chai corresponds to Chochmah, Yechida corresponds to Keser. Okay, Kitzer, Hina Mashikas B'Sesh Beninim was written Tanya, B'chol Teva Yesh Bo Yesh Koach Elyon, V'chayus Kloli. There's a Koach Elyon and a general Chayus, Harla Al Kulana that transcends all of them, and we wanted to explain that, and we did about V'hi Mechavatam Mitzarfatan, Mitzaravtan. It joins them together, Mitzaref them, and puts them into a word. And it transcends the meaning of the word. It's something that transcends the meaning of the word. It's an or klal, it's an or makif. That what joins the letters together, make it into this particular word, is from chokhmah and actually higher than chokhmah, the etzem hanefesh. All right. Are there any questions? If nicht, we'll leave it at that. All right, folks. We'll see you next week.